Welcome to Behind the Line, where we pull back the curtain on the challenges facing first responders and frontline workers. The work you do is unique, and so are the stresses that go with it. Join me as we tackle key issues to reduce risks for burnout, and as we work to support you in doing the job you love without sacrificing being the kind of person you want to be. Hey there, and welcome back to Behind the Line. I'm your host, Lindsay Faas. If you're new to Behind the Line, what you should know about me is that I'm a clinical counselor specializing in trauma therapy. And after over a decade working with first responders and frontline workers around issues like burnout, compassion fatigue, PTSD, and related OSIs, I've become a passionate wellness advocate and educator for those who sacrifice so much for our communities out on the front lines. Behind the Line is a place for us to talk about the real life behind the scenes challenges facing you on the front lines. I created this podcast with the hope of bringing easy access to skills for wellness, allowing you to find greater sustainability both on the job and off. Welcome back, everyone. We are in our summer series where we're just hearing stories from various amazing first responders and frontline workers. I'm so grateful to join you again with an amazing guest, and I can hardly wait for you guys to hear it. Let's dive in. It's great to have you, Mike. I'm so glad that you're able to be here with me today. It's going to be, I think, a fun conversation.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for the topic. So, mental health with corrections is something huge. So I'm willing to and ready to talk about that.
Yeah. That's awesome. It is really huge. I've had several corrections officers that I've worked with in my clinical work, and it's really, unfortunately, a segment of the population of first responders and frontline workers that I think gets overlooked quite a lot. I know I hear that a lot from corrections officers as well as from social workers, that they kind of feel like the forgotten background noise of frontline work, that like police officers and paramedics and nurses get kind of the glory, or at least the attention in terms of the wellness practices and resourcing. And you guys kind of get like, you're just backburnered. No one wants to look too close at the things that you have to do in a day.
Well, I think in order for them to look at where we're at, they have to take a look at what we're taking care of, the inmates and the bad part of society.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of society doesn't want to admit that they have a lot to do with why those guys are there. Matter of fact, they have more to do with it than we do most of the times. Society's the one who decided we're going to have these laws.
Yeah.
We're going to put people in jail. And so I think that's why, in order to forget what's going on over there, I think they have to forget us a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to look at, and it's uncomfortable to sit with what that then means about the choices we're making on a broader level. Totally.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're diving into the thick of things before we even get a chance to get to know you. So, Mike, why don't we back up for a second? And I would love to hear from you a little bit about your story. So tell us a little bit about how you entered into prison work and what your career's been like.
Well, I don't know that I ever thought about entering into prison work. I was actually, when I got out of the military, I went to work on an island in the middle of the Pacific called Johnston Atoll, and I was a cook there for a couple of years. So I came back to Missouri, and I was on leave, and I'm looking around for some jobs, and there's a cook at Missouri State Pen. Now, I've never been in jail. Don't know anybody that knows jail. I'm just blank to this, but it's a cook job. So I call up and apply, and a lady calls me and she says, "We don't need cooks, we need COs." I said, "Well, what's that?" And that's when she told me, that they needed correctional officers, and I needed a job, was getting married, needed insurance, that type of stuff. And I started at Missouri State Pen, which is at the time was known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. It was an amazing, scary, crazy place to start. I still have people that I know back then who, when you're in those situations, you become very tight with the people you depend on. But I saw my first murder and suicide within a couple of weeks of being in there. It was a regular thing to have staff assaults. So it lived up to its name. And So I worked there for a couple of years,
Hmm.
wanted to go back towards where my home was at and put in for an officer job at Ozark Correctional Center, which is in southern Missouri. And I got there and they offered me the chance to run a dog team. And so during my career, that's
Okay.
probably the I don't know if I want to say the best part of my career, but I got to go out in the public. We got to go after find lost
Okay.
children, help elderly people who walked away from
Mm.
nursing homes, help law enforcement find bad
Yeah.
guys. We got to go to parades.
Mm.
We had little coloring sheets, and
Yeah.
the kids would come up. And they knew the
Cool.
dogs' names, so it was a part of corrections that most people never see, because we don't get that
Yeah.
public interface. So
Yeah.
let's see, I did that till 99. And then the
Okay.
warden came in one day and said he didn't want to pay for dog food anymore. And so I applied for the federal system and
Okay.
went to Leavenworth, started there, another penitentiary, another rough place. Gang violence
Hmm.
was off the hook at the time, and did
Yeah.
that for, I don't know, a few years, and then came back to the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri, which
Okay.
the, let's see, it's kind of broke up into quarters. About a quarter of the inmates are cadre. They mow the lawns. They do that kind of stuff. About a quarter of them are medical inmates.
Okay.
Now, those may be lifers. They may be minimum security inmates, but they have medical problems that keep them there. About a quarter of the inmates there are on dialysis. It's the biggest, as far as I know, it's the biggest dialysis center in the United States. Last I knew, there was about 60 machines
Okay.
running all week long. And about a quarter of it
Mm.
is, this is the way I describe it. If you take the Federal Bureau of Prisons inmates and you condense the cream of mushroom soup of the worst mental health inmates, that's where they live. And I spent a lot of my time there in the mental health unit for the
Mm.
next, I became a supervisor, and um, I stayed there till 2015. And so saw a lot of stuff,
Okay.
crazy stuff, sad
Mhm.
stuff,
Yeah.
saw it all. And then they asked me to go
Yeah.
open up it was Thompson Prison in Illinois, which was the special management unit for inmates who are problems. And so I went and opened that up for the next 5 years.
Mm.
And then I went to Washington, D.C. as the chief of the Office of Emergency Preparedness, um, kind of running emergency preparedness and all the special teams for the Bureau of Prisons. And retired at the end of
Wow.
2020 and started a podcast and went to work for Pepperball. So I still get to train law enforcement and corrections. I get to visit with them every week. And so that's been great for me, not to
Yeah.
have to just break it off and step away.
Mm.
But that's me. That's where I'm at
Yeah.
now. I have a wife, Catherine. I have two
Wow.
children.
What a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Thr-
amazing. How old are your kids?
Um, I don't know exact ages. Let me guess here. I think Jacqueline's 30. I think John's 26.
I'm gonna guess right.
I really I quit keeping track when they left
Perfect.
high
I mean,
school.
old enough that you don't have to think about it anymore. Yeah.
Right, right.
Fair. That's fair. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you have done some really amazing things in your career, Mike, and been exposed to some pieces that I think the average Joe may or may not be exposed to in the course of a lengthy career. In something
Right.
like corrections, I think it's hard to have a lengthy career in corrections for a lot of people these days.
Been married 30 years
Yeah.
to the same
When
lady. That's
you,
hard to do too.
I mean, I feel like she deserves an award, probably.
Oh, I guarantee it.
It sounds like there's been a lot of moves and a lot of sacrifices along the way for all of this.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, she's given up a lot, but
Yeah,
that, marriages are one of the first things to go sometimes in corrections. So we've held it together and
yeah,
I'm proud of that.
that's
So,
amazing. Yeah, congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
I'm curious. It sounds like corrections wasn't really the plan in the grand scheme of things. So when you decided to say yes to that offer for going in as a CO when you thought you were going to be a cook, what did you imagine it was going to be like? Like, what was your anticipation for what was going to feel like a good day or what was going to feel like a hard day when you entered into it?
For the first, oh my gosh, for the first several years, I didn't have any expectation to stay. My father was a firefighter. I grew up around police officers and
Yeah.
firefighters, and so I knew
Okay.
public service, but corrections was never part of that. And I think, at the time I was applying for some police departments and some fire departments, and I thought that that would kind of carry me through until I got one of those jobs. And so I
Mhm.
walked in one day, and this was the turning point in my career. And I walked in the lieutenant's office one day, and I said, Lieutenant this, Lieutenant that. I mean, I was just bitching, just griping about this and that. And he turned around
Mm.
at me and he said, are you on the lieutenant's promotion roster? I said, no. He said, then shut up. If you're not willing to step up and fix some of this, I don't
Mm.
want to hear it. And so I
Yeah.
got on there and I went into supervision, and I kind of had to change um, who I was and how I approached things, because now I was leading people, and
Mhm.
their safety was in my hands. And so it gave me a whole new
Yeah.
perspective on corrections. It wasn't just, eight in the gate and just dragging through it every day.
Mhm. Yeah, there was like a different intention in it, it sounds like.
It gave me purpose. I don't think I had purpose with it
Yeah.
before that.
Fair.
Yeah.
Mhm. I mean, it sounds like it kind of changes it from a job to something that has like meaning that feels personal.
hmm it absolutely did. I was
Yeah.
able to affect change. I was able to change things that I saw that were wrong, and I was able to help people.
Mm.
Um, and some of them I've,
Yeah.
brought up through corrections. I'm still doing that. I still get
Mhm.
phone calls from people going, "Hey, boss, I want to put in for this job. What do you think?" So that feels good.
Yeah.
The mentorship that I got to develop.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's cool when that gets to like align with some of how our personal values feel, and maybe in ways that we didn't even know felt important to us until we're doing it and we're in it and we're getting to see what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it wasn't stressful. Doesn't mean that um, every day wasn't tough. I didn't go to work in easy
Yeah.
prisons. I mean, I worked in penitentiaries and the mental health
Mhm.
unit at Springfield. So um,
Yeah.
I will tell you that it affected my family. You can't not
Yeah.
bring that home. Um, it affected my daughter so
Mm.
much. Her
Mhm.
dissertation is about stress in correctional families for her PhD when she got her
Mm.
doctorate in communications. So that's what she did her
Wow.
dissertation on. Yeah. But
Yeah. That's
so
a
that
that's a
says
fun
something.
legacy to get to hold in the midst of it.
Right.
Yeah, it does say something. I mean, one of the common things that I say quite a lot on this show, and I say it a lot in my clinical work, is that nobody comes out of this unscathed. And
Mm-mm.
that goes for the people that do the job, but also for the families that serve them alongside.
Yep, absolutely. And the inmates. I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
I work on that other side, but there's inmates that go through prison and they have to live and deal with this stuff in a different
Yeah.
way than we do, but they have to live with it also.
Behind the Line is sponsored by Beating the Breaking Point. Beating the Breaking Point is a 7-part online training program designed specifically for first responders and frontline workers, and tailored to fill the gaps in your training to support resilience and sustainability. Whether you're new to the work and wanting to cultivate tools to prevent burnout, compassion fatigue, and related concerns, or you are deep into your years on the job and have gone a few rounds with burnout and other mental health challenges, this program offers the foundational pieces you need to support personal and professional wellness for the long haul. You are a helper. You love your work and you sacrifice a lot. Investing in you and your sustainability is the best gift you can give yourself and those who lean on you. We make this program as risk-free as possible by offering a limited money-back guarantee to ensure that it's a fit for you. If you enjoy Behind the Line, you are going to love this program. Google Beating the Breaking Point Lindsay and find everything you need to get started, or use the link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode. Totally. When you kind of think back on the start, and it sounds like you went in with not a lot of strong expectations, but were there things that surprised you in terms of what ended up feeling like it brought satisfaction in your work, or what were the challenges? Like, were there things that kind of came out of left field in terms of what you anticipated versus what reality looked like?
Other than the dog team, um, I don't think I realized any of the good stuff about my job till later in my career. The beginning of my career
Hmm.
was it was a daily grind. When I started my
Yeah.
podcast, my wife asked me. She said, "Who are you doing this podcast for?" And I said, "Well, it's for the officer who's worked 16 or plus hours in a seg unit.
Hmm.
There's no windows in most seg units. You're dealing
Yeah.
with inmates at this roar all the time. You've just finished 16 hours. You walk out in the parking lot. It's dark, and you don't remember what day of the week it is. And
Yeah.
that's the tough part. That's the part that everybody deals
Yeah.
with in some form or another. Um, and I went
Hmm.
through a lot of that. I don't know that um, at the very beginning at Missouri State Pen, there was some fear. There was some, um, I don't know. The wife said I had some nightmares, early on.
Hmm.
And it was mostly me on the yard yelling at the tower to shoot because I was getting attacked. But that was pretty
Yeah.
early on. And after that, you
Hmm.
start learning to push that stuff back. Um, it's a very
Yeah.
alpha male situation. Um,
Yeah.
the the inmates are alpha males. The power is control in there. The weaker inmates get
Hmm.
fed up on like prey, and the predators are after them.
Hmm.
And that doesn't change just because you're an officer. If you're a weak officer, they will treat
Yeah.
you as prey. So you
Yeah.
very quickly, which I'm a big guy. So people always looked at me and said, "Oh, yeah, he can handle it. I'm a big guy." But you
Hmm.
have to build
Hmm.
that up. You have to build yourself up.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense, but that's
Totally.
yeah. That was the change in me, was what I noticed, and there
Mm.
was a ton of stuff. I mean, the first suicide, and I don't know how graphic you get on here, but the first suicide, I had no awareness of how much blood was in a human body. Um, had never been
Yeah.
around that
I've
before.
heard that a lot, actually.
You walk
Yeah.
in there and it's coming up over the edge of your shoes in a cell, and
Hmm.
that's not
Yeah.
something most people deal with. Um, to
Yeah.
watch the face of people as they murder or stab another person and just see that blankness, there's no humanity in their
Yeah.
face. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
a whole new thought to process inside, that there are people like that out there,
Totally.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
that
Yeah.
answer
Well,
your
and I think
question?
I've heard that piece. Yeah. Well, I love it. I mean, I love these conversations because, again, I think you guys are the ones that kind of get pushed to the back. So I think I've had this conversation a number of times, but only with corrections officers. A
Right.
handful of times, maybe with police. But they're usually called after the bad thing has happened, not often, and
Mm,
like they're not necessarily witness to the thing as it is happening.
right.
And you guys are, and you are every single day. And I think that that's a very different vantage point to be positioned in. And it sounds like for you, there's some amount of like, who I have to be in order to be here and be doing this, and how that maybe feels different than the person I walked in the door as.
And I think it was. I think I wanted to grow up to be a writer. Now I'm getting to do some of that stuff.
Mm,
But I never thought of
yeah,
myself growing up. And I mean, I fought in school, but it was never,
sure.
it wasn't violence. It was
Hmm.
fighting in the schoolyard stuff. So when you go
Yeah.
face violence, when you go face true evil, because there is true evil out there, that's one
Hmm.
thing you learn pretty quick. Um, I'll tell you
Yeah.
something funny. You mentioned police officers. One of my best friends is a police officer, and he tells me all the time, he says, "I don't know how you walk in there." He said, "That's crazy. You don't have nothing
Yeah.
on you." I said, "I don't know how you walk up on a car
Hmm.
not knowing whether it's a good guy or a bad guy, because at least I know everybody's a bad guy
Yeah.
inside."
Right.
So we
I know who everybody is here.
we always bug each other
Yeah.
about that, but Yeah. It's a different, even though we do a
Yeah,
lot of the same stuff, it's a different career.
totally. Yeah, no, for sure it is. For sure it is. It's also very different to be immersed in it, right? Like a 16-hour day as a corrections officer, you are in it for 16 hours. As a police officer, you right, like there's that call, but then I get to go back to station, and then there's that call, but then I get to go sit in the squad car for a while. And then there's that, but like there are like breaks, there are downtimes, there are like
Right.
moments to kind of like reconcile and come back together before the next thing. I don't think you guys get hardly any of that, if at all.
No, and I had never really looked at it that way because once you walk through the gate, you stay in there where you go to the bathroom, where you eat,
Yeah.
where you rest, everything is inside the prison. And if the alarms go off, you run. There is no,
Yeah.
I'm on break. So, yeah,
Totally.
it
Yeah.
is. You're in there full time.
Yeah,
And you
totally.
become like
It
them.
is a very full immersion.
You learn to eat
Yeah.
ramen noodles. I mean, you almost pick
Mhm.
up some of the habits
Yeah.
that are go on in prison.
Well, I mean, to some extent, I would imagine that you have to, right? Like there's a certain amount of like adapting to know the evil I'm working with, right? And that to some extent we have to adapt similar tactics and tools in order to be able to battle this kind of monster, right? Like we have to come in and understand in order to be able to do and serve. And so I imagine that's a bit of a catch 22 that we have to kind of sacrifice aspects of our own sense of like self and humanity in order to try to get into the shoes of someone who has done so much sacrificing of their humanity.
Right.
And how do you then emerge back out and do regular life, which I think is the question that I get a lot of clients sitting with me asking. How do you do that? How do I come back out and be with my young kids who believe that the earth is beautiful and that people are wonderful and kind and trustworthy when I have just experienced the worst and hardest of it?
Mm-hmm. And every day you have to do that.
Yeah,
It's not, you don't come out on
totally.
vacation and do that. You have to do it every night when you come in, or every morning, or yeah. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Okay. So we're going to circle back there in a second because I do want to hear, given the length of your career and how you've remained committed to that kind of a career for so long. I think that's rare. And I do want to hear about how you've kind of put pieces in place to be able to do that balancing act. But first, I want to ask you. I know you gave us this like really fantastic resume of this really cool career life you've
Oh, you
lived,
cut
and
out a
there's
little
some
bit.
really neat pieces. Oh, sorry. Hopefully I'll pick back up. Do you got me?
Okay, there you go. Now you're back.
Okay.
Ask
So
me again.
when okay, perfect. So when you reflect on your time in the work, what are your big win moments? Like what will you look back on with a lot of fondness and admiration as you think back on your efforts in the job?
The biggest that I took away, and a lot of this came towards the end, was when I went to
Mhm.
Thompson, Illinois. I opened up the new special management unit. So we were hiring staff, and I was hiring uh, just tons of staff. We didn't open up for the first year because we're doing
Mhm.
all this hiring. So I spent most of a year training these brand new correctional officers. And here I was at the end of my career
Wow.
with the knowledge that I had and the
Mhm.
experience that I had and the things that I'd seen and the resources. I mean, I didn't realize till then the resources I had gathered for myself. And so I was able to sit down and put these classes together and really produced, and not by myself by no means, but
Mhm.
produced some great staff. Um, that was probably the highlight of my career, was getting to see that, getting to see them grow, getting to see us
Mm.
get inmates, and then they walked in the housing unit and they were able to handle it. Several of them, I got to promote from officer to lieutenant, right there
Mm.
during the time I was there. So to see that was
Yeah.
special and meant a lot to me. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be really cool. Yeah. On the flip side,
Hmm.
when you reflect on the work, what are the pieces that you regret or wish you could have done different?
I don't know that I have a lot of regrets. Um, I do think I could have done a better job shutting it off when I came home. Um, Both my kids will probably tell you that. My wife will tell you that too. It is a hard thing to
Mm,
walk out of the roar
mm,
of inmate voices, 8 hours worth of cussing, um, the things that are said to you
yeah.
that most people can't imagine, and then get in a car,
Yeah.
drive 15, 20 minutes, open the door, and go, "Hi, I'm home." That's a hard thing to do.
Totally. Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you've got time,
Totally.
and maybe if you want to cut this or you can. Um, so I used to write poetry, and I actually put it all down in a book. But I have a poem that I think explains me more than anything about that. Have you got time for that?
Lay it on me. Yeah.
So this is something I wrote about the time when I was having most of the trouble. Life is pretty. I see it all around. Pretty wife with green inviting eyes. Pretty kids looking forward, never back. I pat them on the head and kiss my wife. She's my lover, my guidepost sometimes. One last look at the pretty family, pretty flowers on a pretty table. Pretty photographs display a pretty life. Then I leave. As I drive, I start to notice it. I can feel life becoming strained, tainted, and dirty. The prison where I work is out of sight, yet I can feel it. For 8 hours, I try to block the nasty stench, the air. I try not to breathe. Washing, always washing my hands, trying to remove the slime, the filth, the dirt. But it won't wash off. The dirt is not on me, it's all around me, trying to get inside. Finally, the day ends, uneventfully. I return to the prettiness, all clean and safe. I am home again. But I am not all here. I left part of me there, washed away with the dirt. So
Hmm. Yeah.
that kind of sums
That's
it up.
beautiful.
It's just it
It
was a
does sum it up.
cathartic way
Yeah.
for me to put that into words, what I dealt with every day, because I did have a pretty life. Yeah.
Hmm.
Then you go look at the nasty.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
Yeah. So, what are the ways, aside from washing your hands, what are the
mm,
ways that you helped yourself kind of move from one space to the other? And how did you stay in it so long?
well, I'm still in it. I still, like I said, go all the time and get to visit these great people. But you got to have something outside of work.
Mhm.
And for me, through a lot of my career,
Yeah.
it was the Highland Games. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's a bunch of guys in
Oh,
kilts.
shut up. Really?
Yeah.
I
So I could,
love the Highland Games. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So I don't know, maybe 15 years I did that. So that gave us something to focus on the weekends, gave me something to stay in the gym and
That's the
train and
coolest.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We and as a family, every moment that we got, Missouri has, I think, 90 state parks, and we've been to 88 of them.
Mm.
So, I mean, on the weekends,
Yeah.
we just got up and went. And I think that's what did it. I,
Mhm.
I also credit my wife. Um, so, several of the places that I worked think that the only way to do stuff is the way they do it. Well, about once a year, she'd let me just
Mm.
go take a class, whether it was a firearms class or a breaching class or a leadership class, and we'd pull that money out of the stash, and she'd let me go do that. So I got to keep this bigger picture of what corrections was, instead of just
Yeah.
getting trapped in my own little world. I got to see corrections on a bigger picture, more agencies and stuff. And with this
Mm.
podcast now, I'm starting to see it globally. Um, 18% of my listenership's out of Australia. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mm.
now I look at it globally, and I went to the mock riot last 2 weeks ago, and I got to meet guys from
Yeah.
Ecuador and Colombia and all these foreign countries who are there doing the same thing I am. And so I think that helps you a little bit to know that there's a
Mhm.
bigger community, and it's not
Yeah.
just you, because you feel that way.
Totally.
You get locked on those housing units and nobody else is
Mhm.
there. Somebody comes and counts with you twice a night, and it's
Yeah.
just you and somewhere between
Mhm.
40 and 100 inmates. So you start thinking that it's
Yeah.
just you. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Totally. Totally. I mean, I think that's to some extent why we created this podcast was um I think so many people who are in frontline work of any kind feel some amount of that aloneness. Like even in positions where they share space together and have more interaction, we still experience a lot of what we experience feeling like somehow we're holding it differently or we're not doing it as well or we're worried about how the people who are around us are going to perceive us if we really like name how it feels to exist in it, because at some point we also have to have each other's backs and I need them to trust that I'm going to have theirs, so I don't want them to think I'm not okay, but also
Right.
I'm kind of not okay, but because I don't share that I don't know that everyone else is feeling that too. Right. And so I remember when we first started this podcast, I got emails for the first several weeks from various people. I had like a social worker and a nurse and a police officer and a paramedic all in a very short period of time email me and say, I was listening to your podcast. A friend sent it to me. I was listening to it on the way home and I had to pull over to stop and cry because of how I just felt like someone gets it.
Mm.
And it was fascinating that they're not even hearing from people who are in their same profession, but there's so much shared experience in terms of what it feels like to exist in the degree of like chaos and uncertainty, as well as the very like messy political bureaucratic systems that these workplaces tend to operate within, that there's so much commonality across that it didn't matter that they were from totally different professions. They all felt that same
Right.
sense of like, oh my gosh, someone gets it.
Right. And I do think you see that if a correctional officer ever sees an officer needing help, I mean, they're there. When we go downtown, take those inmates
Yeah,
down there, we're there to protect the nursing staff as much as we are anybody else. So I do think
totally.
we feel a kinship, and that
Yeah.
feeling, having that feeling that somebody else understands you is great. But I will also caution that I saw a lot of people who took that, and the place they found that was to go after work to the bar. And so there would be this, bar full of
Yeah.
people sitting in a line here, all commiserating about how bad their day was while they were drinking, and it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
Now, not to say I didn't go out with my friends and have a drink once in a while, but you got to be careful not to let that become your life. You got to have something
Mhm.
else to do. And for me, it was family focused and
Yeah.
Highland games or something else. And then once in a while, I'd go, to the bar and
Mhm.
I'd have a drink. But I saw a
Yeah.
lot of guys that that's every night. When I worked at Missouri State Penn, I remember going to, I can't remember the name of the bar, but it was right off a couple of streets away. And you'd walk in there, and when you'd open the door, you couldn't wear your uniform. And you could just see these
Mm.
rows of bar stools, guys with green pants and white T-shirts because they'd taken off their uniform shirt.
Mm.
And it was,
Yeah.
you'd see
Totally.
15, 20, 30 guys in there, all, of course, dressed the
Yeah.
same, throwing back beer, trying to get rid of that day.
Yeah.
And so something to be careful of.
Totally. I mean, for sure. I love that you're naming that because I think you're right that there's these pieces in terms of how we protect ourselves from the impact of the work by having other like interests. I love the Highland Games piece, right? Like we have things that we feel invested in that aren't just our work. I think one of the risks we have is over identifying with our work being our whole self. And equally, that's true in relationships. Like our work relationships can kind of become our whole sphere of influence,
Hmm.
which is like risky when we don't have other people that offer a counterbalance and show us that not all of the world is this gross, terrible, awful thing all the time. We need those friends or family members or people who have a degree of like innocence and disconnection from that because they help reconnect us to the sense that the world is good sometimes, because we can forget that when we get too immersed over here.
I've done that many times.
Yeah.
My wife's reminded me
Yeah.
of that. Yeah. Of
Totally.
course, one of the
Yeah.
thing every correctional officer's heard is those kids aren't your inmates. You know, 'cause,
Yeah.
we come home and we take some of that
Totally.
off on them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be a hard skill set transition, right? To go from like having to be the one who's like in control in this one space and how we perceive that we're supposed to be in control as like a parent figure. But what that control looks like has to be quite different. At least theoretically, it should look quite different.
It should. When you tell your kid
Yeah.
to go to their room
Yeah.
or you're taking all their property, it's a clue that you know you're not handling it right.
This is maybe not normal. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you've had a couple really great pieces in terms of like ways that you've coped and kind of stayed connected to a sense of your own humanity. That's cool. How did you learn to adapt those pieces and keep them in your life through your career?
Luck. I hate to say it that way, but
Solid answer.
you know, I'm one of those guys. I have tried to improve myself piece by piece every year I've been alive, whatever that is. So I think maybe that's where I was able to
Mhm.
grab a hold and hold on to some of that until the point that it kicked in and it worked.
Yeah.
I was able to
Cool.
try new things and see that they worked. Even as I was moving into those leadership positions,
Hmm.
I'd go get leadership books and, this is how to talk to people because we don't talk to people normally
Yeah.
CO to CO.
Totally.
So now I got
Yeah.
to be a
Hmm.
supervisor and I've got to I've got to, get somebody on board. I got to get them to follow me. And a lot of those tricks I'd try over and over and over again.
Mm,
I noticed it. I'll tell you one little
yeah.
trick, I guess. I remember feeling
Yeah.
disconnected from a lot of the staff. And I don't watch sports. I'm one of those strange guys that doesn't watch sports.
Hmm.
I've never watched an entire professional sports program in my life. It bores me to death. Well, that cuts out
Hmm.
about 80% of what
Wow.
you talk to
Okay.
other guys about. So
Right.
um, I remember I wasn't connecting with people. I wasn't talking to people at work. I'd shut down quite a bit. So I was listening to the radio on the way in, and I would come up with the joke of the day or the sports deal of the day. And then each person I saw, I'd go talk to them about the same thing. And I bet you I'd talk to the same person 20 times
Right.
or the different people about the same thing
Mm,
20 times. But it did form a connection there, and it did give me a reason to talk and that type of stuff
mhm.
that was outside of work.
That's a cool tool. Yeah,
So
totally. I
I don't know
mean,
if they ever.
I find it funny. This has been a conversation so much more since COVID has happened because I have so many clients, aside from frontline workers, just clients generally who are like, I feel like I've lost all of my social skills. I don't know how to talk to people. And
Right.
so I feel like I've made this suggestion multiple times each week where I've said, go Google conversation starters. Come up with like a list of 5 things that you
Right.
could start a conversation with because we're all bad at it now. Everyone's bad at it.
I
So,
agree.
right, like go get like a couple of quick one-liners that you can throw out that get people talking and ease into conversations again because it's hard. But when we have something that just feels like an easy kind of pre-planned and it's comfortable for us topic, it does let
Right.
us kind of bridge to conversations with people that open up different kinds of avenues.
Yeah. I don't know if any of them ever talked to each other and realized I was doing that, but yeah, it was easy for me.
Wouldn't it be funny if they were like all connecting every once in a while and like, oh man, today Mike's topic is this. Get
He's
ready for it.
he's been working in the mental health unit too long. He's repeating
Uh-huh,
himself.
totally. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so if you were to do it all over again, Mike, what would you
Mm.
do differently? Is there anything?
I would probably go federal first because of
Okay.
the pay and stuff. But at the same
Okay.
time, working at the state level, um, I just built connections with people that you don't build anywhere else. And I talk to those guys because I don't
Sure.
know, it's like frontline stuff, and you're protecting them and they're protecting you. And the state, everybody was broke. Everybody was,
Yeah.
everybody had ketchup and beer in their refrigerator back then.
Mhm.
Um, so we built this deep connection
Yeah.
that's hard for me to say I would walk away from that. But as far as a job
Yeah.
and insurance and the retirement that I got to do and stuff, going federal, um,
Mhm.
I would have started investing in myself earlier and became a leader earlier
Hmm.
because I spent 9 years at
Okay.
the state of Missouri as a CO, and then it wasn't until I think 2008, 2009 when I promoted with the federal system. So, I mean, I was 16, 17 years as your base level CO, working the housing
Mhm.
units, working the jobs, transport and stuff like that. And I did find a lot of self-satisfaction once I became a supervisor and a leader. And like I said, I could start pointing things a different way and helping people. So I probably would have done that quicker. Um, People often ask me, would you have went and got a college degree?
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I put both kids through college. I did all this at a high school
Mm,
degree, and there's several of us that
yeah.
I've ran into over the years. I retired as a GS-14 chief in DC with a high school diploma, and corrections is one
Totally.
of the few places where you could still grab your own bootstraps and go to the top. You really, the job you do and how you do it, and granted, there's politics everywhere, but the job you do and how you do it
Sure.
can carry you in this field still. And I think that is probably true for
Mm,
police and you know other places like that. But I don't know where else I could have. I don't picture myself somewhere else anymore. If that's you know,
mhm. Yeah.
I did it. I did it pretty
Yeah.
well. I'm happy. Um, so I don't picture
Yeah.
myself doing something different. I don't know, maybe archaeologist.
Ah, like Indiana Jones.
Right. An
Cool.
Indiana
I
Jones
mean,
type.
good
Yeah.
side alternative.
Right.
Yeah, fair. Exactly like that with the fedora and everything. Um, you mentioned this piece about I did it and I think I did it well. And I'd agree with you. I think it's amazing the career that you've had. I wonder what you think differentiates you and your journey from some of those who aren't able to kind of make it through that many years or kind of make it to the pension timeline. Like, what do you think are the things that allowed you to stay in as long as you were able to and remain as intact as you seem, where others really get broken by this job?
I mentioned already family connection. I think that's huge. I think that was big for me. But I also think when you go into work,
Yeah.
it's very important who you attach yourself to. And I was careful,
Okay.
I think, to attach myself to some really quality people over the years. Now, whether they were the same rank as me or whether they were
Mm,
supervisors or whatever, I worked with some great people. Now, I've worked with some bad bosses, but I attached myself
mm,
to great people who still call me and check up on me, and I'm retired. So I think that would
yeah.
probably be, other than family, make sure, because there's always that. Let me tell you a little
Hmm.
story. So I go to work at Ozark Correctional Center, and they put me on midnights. Of course, I'm a rookie, so I'm on
Hmm.
midnights, and there's a guy working the front gate, old guy. And every night I'd go down there because I had to make my rounds, and he'd go, rah, rah, rah. He just hated life. So 6 months in, there's a job comes
Yep.
open on day shift. And I said, well, I'm going to put in for this job.
Hmm.
And he says, you're not going to get it. They don't want you on days. I put in for that all the time. I don't get it. I'm like, okay. I went ahead and put in for it anyway. So I got it. 6 months in, now I'm on day watch. And I see the captain, and I'm
Hmm.
like, hey, why won't you guys let Pete come to day watch? And he says, Pete put in for day watch once 15 years ago. He's been sitting out there on midnights bitching about it ever since. And I think that was something that really stuck with me, you know, because I ran into a
Oh my
lot of
gosh.
those people who never were happy with their situation and didn't want anybody else to be happy
Yeah.
with theirs. So I avoided them.
Hmm.
And there are a lot
Hmm.
of that in corrections.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. I think that that's a wise piece of advice to be able to kind of like nail down who the good people are, who the people are that can kind of keep you grounded, and how do
Right.
you stay connected to those people, and then how do you kind of like, I mean, we talk a lot on the show about the idea of boundaries, right? And how do we draw boundaries around ourselves to protect ourselves from some of those people that would otherwise try to sink us just because they're miserable and misery
Mm,
loves company.
it does. And
Hmm.
if you get those good connections around you, those people, and look at not just how they're at work, but look at their lives. If they're happy people outside of work, they're normally happy people inside of work. Uh, and latch onto those people
Yeah.
because they'll give you that little elbow nudge when you're headed the wrong way around the wrong people,
Mhm.
and say, "Is that really what you want to do?" Well,
Yeah,
no, that's not me, and
totally.
bring you back to the middle.
Thanks for calling that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. Okay. So given your career and the fact that you have done a lot of training, I'm going to ask you this question. I feel like you probably have a solid answer for it, but if you could speak to students or rookies who are in your profession or entering into it, what words of wisdom or advice would you share with them or hope for them to receive to support their career going forward?
well, I kind of do that pretty regularly. I get to go talk to either college
Mm-hmm.
classes or when I go teach, and I just try to take away the fog of how bad corrections is, because there is good in corrections. There's
Okay.
per capita, I think there's probably as many good people working corrections as there is anywhere. And maybe I'm biased, but I love being around them.
Yeah.
I love being around them and police
Yeah.
officers and first responders. We all have kind of the same sense of humor. I tell my classes, when you retire, people at the coffee shop don't
Mm-hmm.
laugh at your jokes. They don't get them. So it's good to get back out there with, the people I worked with who
True
get those
story.
jokes.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I just kind of remove that fog.
Yeah, totally.
It is what you make out of it, and it will be what you make out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, high school
Yeah.
to chief in DC, anybody can do that. It wasn't that I'm that special. I just pointed in a direction and I kept
Mm-hmm.
running until I got there. And I think anybody can do that.
Yeah.
Have you ever listened to the Jocko Willnick podcast? He's a Navy SEAL,
No,
and
but I'm familiar with the name.
yeah,
Yeah.
he wrote Extreme Ownership, and he's a Navy SEAL. And he said one day, he said, "Thank God for the Navy SEALs, because where else would people like me go?" And corrections is kind of
Mm-hmm.
like that. Thank God for corrections, because where else would people like
Yeah,
me be able to excel? Where else would I have those
totally.
opportunities to just go? And
Yeah.
when you get in the
Yeah.
Federal Bureau of Prisons, I mean, there's 122 institutions nationwide. And every one of those
Mm-hmm.
institutions has associate wardens, cook supervisors, teachers, captains, lieutenants. I mean, you name the job. So if you
Yeah.
want the chance to go somewhere and do something new, and um, corrections is the place. I just sounded
Yeah.
like a
That's
commercial,
cool.
didn't I?
I like that perspective. You did a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It was a solid marketing sell. I I actually love what you said. And I think that there's this really interesting piece that I want to make sure is very clear about how I think you've done that, because I think the risk for some people is that they enter it without a plan and without a direction, and they build too much of their sense of self into the identity of the job that they do. And so I think that the really careful balancing act that I think you managed to strike is that you did this thing where you didn't just get in and stay stagnant in a position. You were always kind of like, what's the training? What's the next thing? How do I kind of like, whether it's a lateral move or an upward move, how do I keep moving? How do I not
Hmm.
stay still for too terribly long? Because I think when we stay still for too long, it becomes more and more personally attached, which then makes it more and more of who we are and our identity. And you
Hmm.
also did this thing where you balanced it. So you had this, but you also had this great family life and interests and activities and things that you were able to pour into over here, and that you allowed to pour back into you, that offer something that feels life-giving and like not the crazy messed up evil-y stuff that lives in the job. And that
Yeah,
counterbalance, I think, is the only way to keep some amount of sanity in this kind of
sure.
work. Because I think when you spend, if you get fully invested here and your whole sense of identity and self gets here, you lose that humanity piece.
Yes, you absolutely do. And I've lost.
Yeah.
Uh, there's no way that even to this day that I have not lost some humanity that I will never get back. I
Sure.
have. I watched inmates cleaning up blood while I was eating the bologna sandwich for my lunch, walking through it. It just doesn't
Yeah.
phase you after a while. It's
Hmm.
it's surreal. I do want to say one
Yeah.
more thing, and I
Totally.
can't believe I really glossed over this, but another way that I absolutely believe that I stayed sane was special teams. And if there's somebody working in corrections
Mm,
right now, getting on those special teams, I was always either on emergency squad, I was on the corrections special tactics squad, I was dog handler, uh, disturbance control
yeah.
team, and so I was always on
Mhm.
those teams, which builds this little, connection to this brotherhood and sisterhood of a few individuals who
Yeah.
will support you in there. And it also keeps you on the straight
Mhm.
and narrow, because in
Yeah.
order to be on a team, you have to reach a certain level. And if you're not keeping up that level, most of the times a team member will step over and go, "Hey,
Mhm.
you need to fix this. You're making us all look bad." And I think that helps a lot. And I think it's a great
Yeah.
resource for anybody is go get on those teams, that CERT team or whatever you've got at your
Mhm.
institution, even if it's, hostage negotiation or something like that. Get on those teams so that you
Yeah.
can build that camaraderie. Because that was big in my career.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, and those like added skill sets, right? Like that allow you to kind of have that resume that says if I wanted to transfer somewhere else, I have that on my resume that I could and
absolutely.
would if I needed to.
Yep.
I
Yep.
think again, the piece I would add to that is you're right. I think those pieces offer these really cool ways to feel like a community within a community and that degree of support and connection. Again, I've had a few clients where they share stories about like participating in their union or participating in special teams, but it's always this like choice point in doing this thing. Am I doing it in a way that is adding and growing my investment in this workplace in a way that detracts from my life outside? Or
Right.
am I doing this in a way where I still get to hold my life outside? And if it is detracting from my life outside, that's risky. Because I think
Yes.
that's the place where some people get more and more and more invested because they're taking on more and more and more responsibility or interest here and they lose
Sure.
access to the outside life piece. So
Yeah.
I think you're totally right, but it's like a with intention and caution about how you go
Yes.
about doing it.
And you have to have a
Yeah.
special person that you're married to on the outside. Because my wife, sometimes I didn't come home and
Totally.
she might not hear from me for 24 hours if we were out on a manhunt, and she just had to know that I was,
Totally.
safe and doing my job. And that takes a special
Yeah.
person too. Yeah.
Totally. Totally. Um tell me, so I've asked all the questions I intended to ask,
Okay.
but I really want to hear more about your podcast. And I know that you're doing a bunch of writing. So tell us a little bit about some of your big plans in retirement. What are you up to?
Well, just as an afterthought, when I retired, I thought about this podcast and I started the Prison Officer podcast. And the main intention of it is try to just put out a community, kind of, to let people know that they're
Mhm.
not alone inside, like we've talked about, and maybe to throw some stuff
Yeah.
I've learned out there, little tips and tricks. One of the
Mhm.
podcasts that's done the best is, or one of the episodes is, how to be a good rookie, and that was just something I threw together,
Ooh,
and so I've
yeah,
had a lot of people jump on that, which has led
cool.
to some of my writing. I'm here in a week
Mm,
or two. I'm not sure when the podcast will come out, but here in a week or two, the Prison Officer Podcast Job Guide is a book that I just wrote,
mm,
and it's got 6 chapters
cool.
of how to get hired in corrections. And then the last part of it is a listing of each of the states and how to get a hold of them, private corrections, some international corrections, federal corrections, how to, you know, get a hold of them, what they pay. Because I get a lot of questions. What should I do? Where should I go?
Yeah,
And so I just put all this together
cool.
and I just went on Amazon 3 days ago. So I'm getting stuff together to release that.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then the podcast is going great. And then I do some writing for Corrections One now and again. You can see me on there. So,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and with being a pepperball instructor, they let me travel around and, uh, like I said, go get to
yeah.
meet more law enforcement and corrections and be around my people.
That's cool.
So,
Which is like
yeah,
it's nice when we can like use retirement to just invest harder in the projects that bring some amount of like fun or that we feel passionate about.
yeah. And I run across a lot of people who go, "Why in the world don't you just walk away from it?" Because I know a lot of people that have. they retire and they don't ever even
Yeah.
say the word prison again. But I still think I've got a
Hmm.
lot of stuff to say and some people to help along the way and make their job easier. And so I think I'll keep doing it for a while and see where it goes.
That's cool. I mean, I think that we need people like that. We need people that are willing to kind of translate down their experience and wisdom to the generations coming up and to leave that kind of legacy. Like that's a pretty cool piece to get to continue to invest in and pour out of.
Yeah.
Very
Um,
cool.
you know, there's
Well,
training yourself and anyway, there's training
yeah.
yourself, and then there's that point where you get to life and you're becoming knowledgeable and you get to train others, and then there's this point at the end where
Hmm.
you're a mentor and you get to direct and help
Hmm.
people, definitely the best part.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's cool. That's cool. I'm curious if there's anything else, Mike, that you would want to share or that you'd want our audience to hear about.
Oh, um, no, just know that you're not alone out there. I know some of you are sitting in
Yeah.
a seg unit right now, and you can't hear nothing but the roar of the voices, and you're getting cussed at and things said to you that most of your family can't imagine. And it's a global
Hmm.
corrections world out there. There's people doing this job all over the world, and as long as we keep that in mind and just know that we're not alone, I think it helps with the day to day. I think it does.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, totally. I super appreciate your time, Mike, and for you to take the time to share some of your wisdom and experience. I think it's wonderful. We will absolutely be linking to your podcast as well as your book on Amazon coming up to make sure that people can find that real easy if they want to jump down to the show notes and check that out. So thanks so much for your time today.
sounds good. Thank you, Lindsay. Have a
Cool.
great day.
You
I
bet.
want to say one more big thank you to my guest for today. It is so wonderful to get to have this opportunity to talk to some incredible and amazing people who have been out there doing the work, seeing the stuff, and figuring out how to hold it differently. I'm so grateful for the willingness of these incredible people to jump on with me, share their stories, and share with you the various ways that they're learning and finding to move through this kind of work with some amount of sanity intact. I think we can all take something really special from that. As we wrap up today, I want to encourage you to please reach out and connect if you have any questions or feedback. You know I love hearing from you and shaping this podcast to echo your needs and interests. I also love hearing about what you're working on and how you're using what we talk about on the show. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Lindsay A. Faas, or you can email me at support@thrive-life.ca. If you have any feedback for my amazing guest today, please let me know and I'm happy to pass it along. I continue to be so amazed and inspired by this community that we are building and creating together. I'm so grateful for your support and that many of you are so incredibly keen to share about Behind the Line to others on the front lines. Thank you so much for sharing with those you know. I want to let you know that we do have ways to support sharing. So if you reach out to me, I can send you posters and cards and all kinds of other ways that you can share with your workplace and your colleagues about Behind the Line and our other resources. Also know that you can share any of our social media posts or forward any of our emails that we send you with reminders about the show. We just want more people to be supported. Know that we can be found online on our website, on most major podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. Many of our summer series episodes will be videotaped, and we will include those recordings on YouTube. So check those out if you want to join us in real life. Click subscribe to get alerts about our latest episodes, or subscribe to our email list to hear from me about all the exciting things we have going on and coming up. You'll find all the details you need in the show notes, and you can access our email list by clicking to get our free Beating the Breaking Point Indicators Checklist and Triage Guide, which helps you facilitate self-assessing burnout and related concerns. We make all of our different resources available to you guys because the work you do really, really matters to our communities. But way more than that, you matter. Your life matters, and the people who matter to you matter. And we want to make sure that you have what you need to keep up the good work at work, but but as well in your very real and amazing life outside of the work. So use it and share it. And until next time, stay safe.